Hello and good evening. My name is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This is project 2 for CMP 168. So I'm going to start with what the project is about. The project is creating a Minesweeper game for a player, and to click the bombs, and whichever tile they click that happens to be false or true either makes you lose the game or win the game. Okay, so to start off, I want to start off on my private int boolean. On my private classes, where I have bomb grid, where I have count grid, num rows, num columns, and num bombs. In the constructor, I have specified what each feature is until each feature is subjected to their variable, to their values, which num rows is 10, num columns is 10, num bombs is 25. Here we have the create bomb grid and the create count grid, which we'll explain a little later, which the constructor calls on. It's the same for the overloading constructors here and here, where they call the create bomb grid and the create count grid. We're calling num rows rows and num columns columns. And here again, we are reiterating the rows, columns, and bombs, as well as the creating bomb grid. To continue on, we have the getters and setters. We have we have to get num rows, get num columns, get num bombs, and now we start with the get bomb grid. Excuse me. So here we have the bomb grid for the Minesweeper, which calls into the num rows and num columns, which are both 10. This copies the bomb grid length and the bomb grid k length so that it can be able to store everything here, so that everything could be stored here and projected onto other methods. Here we have get count grid, which is a 2D array, which we also have num rows and num columns of, and each for int k equals k num rows, which technically means that it's calling for the num rows, and as long as k is less than num rows and j is less than num columns, then it'll continue implementing for the Minesweeper. Once it goes over, it cannot implement anymore. Now, we're going to get count location. Get count location also calls on count grid num runs and num columns, num rows and num columns, so that it can be able to have everything that it properly needs, and it can call all the features of the game. Create bomb grid was the one that I had struggled with the most in this project. But to start off, what I've done so far is bomb grid equals new boolean, num rows equals num columns, which is setting up the bomb grid arrays. Here, it's showing everything in the bomb grid to equal false, and we're on the for int, the bomb grid length, and the bomb grid 1 length, and it's setting everything, the k, which is the x, and the j, which is the y, num rows, num columns, to false. Here we have a new int that shows exactly what shows the number and the variable, and as long as v is less than num bombs, which is 25, the randomizers will start activating, and the randomizers will be equal to false until otherwise proven true. Here they would be incrementing, and the adding and the num bombs would be incrementing. I've actually struggled with this one. This one did not work no matter how hard I tried. I'm still working on it, but I have done what I could. Finally, we get to create count grid. So random r equals new random, random int row next int 9 because the system is 10 and it has to be less than 10. Same for our columns because it's 10 and it has to be 10, and it's calling for the row of numbers and the r columns, and this is calling for all the rows and the columns in the random for the project. So now here we go to Minesweeper. I was also sadly unable to finish it due to the lack of time and my efforts in trying to fix the grid. But my intended purposes for the Minesweeper, as you can see, was to call on the J panel, to call on the windows, to open it up. This is up to the point where I've gotten it to, which is really just setting everything up for here. So my intention was to, aside from fully creating the J panel, it was for it to have all the num rows and all the num columns on the new window. And when you click the bomb, and for when you click the bombs, you're able to have access to all the pieces. So the intent was for you to be able to click on a blank tile, and the number and a random number would pop up in the tile, and you'd be able to, from between, not a random number, between the numbers 1 through 4, 0 through 4, and you'd be able to choose which one, and you wouldn't know which one was to have the bomb or not. So that was the point of this.